Hello, hello, hello. It is Monday, and Monday is Monday Fun Day, where I get to talk about whatever the frick I want, which is always world building. Every single time it's world building, guys. World building. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about my story that has been dubbed Crow Story. Why has it been dubbed that? We will never know. What's being drawn, however, right now is not Crow Story. It is my other project called The Books of Avo. It was originally released as a novel with these incredibly amazing watercolor illustrations, hand done. I love them, beautiful. And the stories, I think it's good. It is 1920s, it is dragons, it is lesbians. So check it out if you want to. It's on itch.io and it is also on Etsy in physical form. Enjoy! So today we're going to be talking about Crow Story as usual. Last week we talked about a place called Faymouth, and before that we talked about so much more, and it is all available in a playlist. I try my best to explain what is going on. However, there's so much going on. Obviously, there's been a lot of videos, there's a lot to talk about, but I will try my best to catch you all up. So we were talking about Faymouth, and Faymouth is a territory that exists within this kingdom called the Kingdom of the Lindworm. And they are stinky and they do bad things, and we will learn about stinky bad things today. This video, we're going to talk about two cultures, two religions that are practiced within the region of Faymouth. We're going to talk about common Lucent, and then we're going to talk about some witches, some Lucent witches. So the way that it works is that this is a world full of elves. Everything is elves. Even when I talk about centaurs and things, those are all elves. Everything can interbreed. Orcs are elves, mermaids are elves, elves. There are 12 different elements, and everyone is related to one element, and there is a magic mage version of the element, and then there's an animal that corresponds to an element. And everyone kind of exists somewhere on a spectrum within their element. I hope that makes sense. I've repeated it enough, so the element of today is Lucent. We're talking about Lucent, which is the element of light. So common Lucent is a religion that extends way beyond Faymouth. It actually comes originally from the area called the Sylvan Forest, and specifically a province within the forest called Silo Peak. Common Lucent, like most other Lucent traditions, Common Lucent is extremely willing to accept new beliefs and lore. They are about it. Above all else, Lucent faith strives to find answers and strives to seek truth. So if evidence challenges their practice and beliefs, it's welcome. Like, they're so interested. If when scrutiny is given to these new informations and they turn out to be true, then yay, it's good. That is the Lucent way. So traditions are always kind of changing to fit with the times. Common Lucent values literacy and understanding basic sigils. So sigils are like these magical symbols that occur when people are doing magic, and they occur in other places too. The main time sigils occur is when someone awakens as a mage and their first magic is used. Usually a sigil appears, and it's either burned in or shows up and blah 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 blah. Great explanation. So yeah, they value literacy, which is not actually that common within this whole world. They are the bookworms. I'm sorry. Sigils and their study are kind of the main thing about Lucent. It's the main thing on everyone's mind. And they believe that sigils are related to kind of divine communication with the Lindworm. And the Lindworm is the god of kind of the world, says the Lindworm orthodoxy, I guess. And so sigils and all that, some of it guides magic, while other sigils might be like stories that the Lindworm is trying to like convey. But either way, it is like some sort of divine information brought forth by the Lindworm. So like meditation is a huge practice within Lucent, and it is way more common than any sort of prayer or worship. The goal of the Lucent is to unravel the Lindworm's message and to find kind of the meaning of life. They are just fascinating. They're just interested in what's going on. They're like you guys. They're listening to the stories, man. Because of their focus on literacy, most Lucent elves have a rudimentary understanding of Temple Elvish. So Temple Elvish is a language that is completely different from like common Elvish. It's kind of like its own little thing. It's called Temple Elvish because it kind of came from the Temple Elves, which are a group of Lucent elves that have horns, basically. And the reason why everyone kind of has like a basic understanding of Temple Elvish is because Faunish, the language of fauns, which is the most common language spoken by the common Lucent worshippers, like most of them speak Faunish. However, they have to understand Temple Elvish because there isn't really a standardized written form or writing system for the faun language that has been like developed and standardized in any way. So instead, most texts are written in Temple Elvish, and it is considered kind of like the writing of the common folk, actually, because there is another type of writing that exists, and that is the divine script. And divine script is basically the writing system for common Elvish, common Elvish being basically just what is predominantly spoken in the kingdom of the Lindworm. So like there's a written version of it, and it is more archaic in like most of the texts that are read, but it's understandable when spoken. However, it is believed by the divine kingdom that fauns are incapable of reading the divine text. Like it is brought to them by the Lindworm, and therefore fauns can't read it because fauns are stinky. Therefore, fauns are not allowed to read the divine script because it is believed that the only way a faun could ever learn the divine script is through witchcraft. So if you can read and you are a faun, if you can read the divine script, you're a witch. It's just the facts, bro. You're too not magical to read. Sorry, not sorry. So all fauns capable of reading are then blinded, so they can never read again if they are found out by the Divine Kingdom. Right. Divine Kingdom always doing messed up things. Great. Especially they really do not like witches, and witches are basically anyone they do not like, but mostly it's fauns. Mostly it's anyone that is animal-like and practices anything vaguely construable as magic. So yeah, like I said, if a faun is caught with the ability to read, they are blinded, and this is done by like swearing your commitment to the Lindworm, and then you have acid poured in your eyes. Those believed to be witches, however, because like maybe you just used a single spell. Like maybe you're not like a practitioner of witchcraft. Like this is just your one kind of offense, so we're just gonna blind you. However, those that are believed to be witches or serial practitioners of witchcraft, they are also forced to like drink acid as well. And this can be like in order to execute them, or it can be like a small amount that it's meant to like damage the throat and ruin the ability to speak after swearing themselves to the Lindworm. Because the Lindworm Kingdom has this whole thing where they want you to like say like, I love the Lindworm, Lindworm is my god, and then they want to get rid of your ability to talk. And they usually like cut out tongues and stuff, and it's not like you can't talk without a tongue. Like, I don't know, it's symbolic and just cruel, basically. So yeah, that's what can happen if you're caught being able to read. And also they have witch vibes. You got witch vibes, so we're gonna do worse to you. But because of this, because fawns aren't allowed to read, Common Lucent kind of revolves around temples and like a leadership of mages, and the mages read aloud from the books so that the fawns can hear what's in the books. And like these mages are like the teachers of their communities. They may form like temples in the village, or they may be like part of nomadic tribes. And like these nomadic tribes of like Lucent practitioners, like the nomadic ones, the ones that go around, they're really important because they visit the different villages and they help kind of the circulation of knowledge, which is very important. Having like the temples to go to hold a bunch of knowledge and keep it safe, that's also important. So like both like nomadic and settled peoples are like very important within like common Lucent society. Yeah, so they go around, they share stories, and they will like write them down. And a lot of like ancient fawn myths were ended up like preserved because of the Lucent followers. So they keep history and records and things, like it's just important to them. So common Lucent believers, they tend to be a lot more rigid in their beliefs than the old temple elves. Like when you think about like the old temple elves, you think of like ancient tradition. However, because the common elves exist within the Lindworm orthodoxy, there is like a lot of pressure to accept the Lindworm and not question it. So it colors a lot of beliefs because there are these places where like you're not allowed to think, basically. And because of how brutal like the Divine Kingdom can be, and seeing peoples and hearing about like other peoples that have interacted with them, it's like we are just going to accept the Lindworm as truth. Let's go. In these areas where the Lindworm is like common, where there's like temples established for the Lindworm, that's where there's like almost a crossover of the two religions, where common Lucent is practiced alongside and is taught by the mages. But the closer you are to the Lindworm Kingdom, the more it's just going to start becoming basically just pure orthodoxy as you move south, until eventually it's just all just orthodoxy. So common Lucent. Okay, so one final thing to note is that while Faunish is spoken and like there's the rudimentary understanding of Temple Elvish, another big language that is spoken within like common Lucent faith is the language of Crow Harpies. And there are no Crow Harpies that practice Lucent faith at all. Instead, the language remains in the common fawn populations that used to live in regions that overlapped with Harpies before the Harpies ended up being driven out. So it's basically like, I'm speaking English right now, but I'm not from England. There's just like historical reasons why I am speaking English right now. And that's the same for like the Crow Harpy language within the areas of common Lucent practice. So yeah, what happened was that there was Harpies there, and they were very disliked for being very close to like gremlins, because gremlins exist on the spectrum between crows and crystal mages. They ended up being driven out for being animalistic and not loved. The gremlins are really not loved, especially in the past. So also, and this is predominantly in the east and not with the Lucent elves that we're talking about right now. This is predominantly like the temple elves, the old temple elves that I mentioned. So the Harpies also were really not fans of the temple elves, because the temple elves, in their pursuit of knowledge, they took harpy eggs to experiment with. Not cool. There also was like a culture that kind of developed of stealing eggs in fawn populations and then selling them to the Lucent temples. And all of this led the Harpies to like just go to the mountains and get away from all of these losers. Yeah, common Lucent, like it has like some specific folktales about Harpies and their eggs that exist. They were used as kind of like good luck charms. So you'd keep a harpy egg in your house, and the Lady of Faymouth attributed having a harpy egg with allowing her to have a child when she was considered barren, basically. So everyone started being like, oh, I will obtain a harpy egg. Meanwhile, temples would keep the eggs to show to their students and teach with them, and like the harpy chicks would rarely ever hatch because they would be cared for so poorly. If an egg hatched and it was being used as a good luck charm, the person who obtains this like harpy chick would just kind of leave it out there and hope that the harpies found it. If it was kept by the temple elves, like they would study the harpy chick, and so few of these chicks ever survived because they're just so different to take care of than little purely mammalian babies. And those that ever like somehow managed to live all the way through childhood into adulthood, they were like really stunted and otherwise disabled, and it just was not a good thing. So common Lucent, do better. Though honestly that was mostly the temple elves. And okay, so last but not least, we're going to talk about the Eastern Lucent witches. So they predominantly live in Faymouth, but some of them live on the border of the Sylvan Forest. Again, they focus on the Lucent element. They're pretty similar to common Lucent, and most would just consider themselves to be like not that different, and instead it's more like a distinction that's made by the orthodoxy rather than like the Eastern witches themselves. Like they're just kind of labeled witches because, like I said, that's what the Lindworm Kingdom does. So East Lucent witches, they believe in that pursuit of knowledge, they value literacy. Though fauns aren't permitted to read the divine texts, they have texts read to them by the mages. So it's all pretty much the same, right? And they believe in all of the same things as common Lucent. This distinction basically is that the mages in the area and in like the far north practices of common Lucent, which honestly aren't that different from the witches at all, but regardless. So what it is this group of common Lucent practitioners, what happened is that the mages there, they all have horns. That is the distinction. That is the distinction that changed everything. So they developed horns and all was good. And they were prepared for when the Divine Kingdom showed up, because the Divine Kingdom's kind of a powerhouse, and they knew that it was going to show up and it was going to take over. And they'd seen what happened, and they knew that fauns weren't supposed to read. So all good, right? Wrong. Mages with horns, not cool. Witchcraft. End of it, beginning of it, witches. All of these mages that practiced magic, could do all of the things that regular mages could do. They were considered witches because they were considered to be fauns, and using magic as a faun is witchcraft, and it is banned, and it is terrible. So because all of this, they really weren't prepared when the orthodoxy actually did show up, because all of their teachers, all of like these respected leaders, they were just considered to be witches. They were considered to be incorrect. Yeah, so this shaped the practices of these witches and created these big divides, and like it just created like a lot of differences in this specific population. So there's been like a few generations since the occupation began. All right, so what basically happened was that the Divine Kingdom showed up and everyone was blinded with like the acid and stuff, and then everyone was also like forced to say their piece to the Lindworm, and they were then like forced to have like the acid like in their mouth and stuff. So a lot of them like do have like some struggle talking as well as being blind. Like this was in the mage population. Those that were fawns were mostly spared because they didn't learn any of that stuff, but regardless, it's the Divine Kingdom. Do you think they cared? No. So they kind of thought like, you know, this is the end of these witches, they'll be gone. But after that point, blinding of mages was done to like all old and young. Any mage was just blinded by the kingdom, treated poorly, like regardless of if they ever even learned. It was just like a continual punishment that kept happening to them. What eventually happened was that in the following years and generations, because that continued to be like an attack and a threat to newly awoken mage children, this led to the development of like more humane ways to blind themselves instead. Like basically, even if you never learn to read, the Divine Kingdom in this area was just so ruthless and awful that like it was kind of inevitable that you would mess up and they would blind you. So it just became kind of the thing where you awaken as a mage, and then a mage that is proficient and doesn't have horns and usually is sylvan and is capable of like enchanting like eyes and stuff, like they will perform like a blinding thing, usually giving you like the eyesight of like an animal that can't see well at all. And like Lucent mages can make it so that you are incapable of ever seeing text, like just because like Lucent Magic is light magic and it deals with like perception and what is perceived, you know, light, the perception of light, illusions and whatnot. These are like not entirely permanent, but functionally you are like permanently blinded or incapable of reading. But there aren't a lot of mages that are able to do this, right? What they did instead was figure out some alchemy. And alchemy is a bit fuzzy because, you know, some alchemy is considered to just be witchcraft, but I think because it worked out in the favor of the Divine Kingdom, they mostly allowed it. So there's like a set of like Lucent and Void's sigils, and those would be like tattooed onto a person, and these symbols would then stop one from being able to see. And these symbols aren't really the preferred way to do it for the Lucent witches themselves, because it's not really possible to tailor the spell perfectly for every single mage, and a lot of the times it can end up dulling all sorts of different other perceptions to varying degrees. So like it ends up like blinding them, but also they can lose like their hearing, or they can lose like their like tactile perception a little bit. It's just not preferred. However, the Lindworm Kingdom, the Divine Kingdom, the lords that have control over them, that is their much preferred way, because they can see it and they're like, okay, they're blinded, they're good, and then they never get like hassled again. And so with all of this in mind, a lot of what makes the Eastern witchcraft unique is their like dedication to like accessibility. They didn't really let themselves just crumble because of this. They didn't just like give up on everything, right? Like they've worked really hard to make it possible for like the blind to read and read different texts by creating like tactile writing systems and continuing the sharing of knowledge. And like this like extends, of course, to people who are like deaf blind as well, because there is a significant portion of witches that are like deaf blind. And they've also really made huge discoveries when it comes to void magic in general, because the element of void is just not studied and not really known, especially on the eastern continent. Like it is the element that like the raven harpies have, and they are like so far away that like actually taking time to like look into void magic is like, you know, difficult. But because of circumstances, like they've really learned a lot about it and like the alchemy surrounding it. They're also like able to understand Lucent magic on like some levels that like haven't been looked into before, because like everything is like focused on like the big flashy like displays. And like I think like the Divine Kingdom, in the way that they looked upon like the Lucent witches, they were like, ha, you're blind, you are like removed from your element like entirely, like that's part of the punishment. However, there is like more to Lucent than just flashy lights, and like there are like hidden sigils and things that are like perceived on like a different level, I guess. Yeah, so they've made a lot of strides in learning about that. Their communities are very strong, and over time they've like developed their own non-oral languages. Specifically, they've got like tactile sign language that has developed, especially in like the regions where like they were really susceptible to the sigils that got placed on them. It just affected a lot of them, and a lot of them became like deaf blind as a result. And just kind of like over time and generations, like they have developed communication that is robust and cool. Because of this like value of spreading knowledge and all of that, like the tactile languages that like have developed were then like shared and propagated, so that people who had like maybe like one deafblind person in their region, or like, you know, one or two, like that language was able to like propagate further, and like through communication, you know, it's all good. And like in the meantime, they're also like working on trying to hone the alchemy so that it doesn't do so much to people, especially like those people who are like so deprived of senses with tactile and like hearing loss, like, and they just have a hard time of it, right? And like the witches, like their philosophy kind of like Temple Elvish as a whole, like has a lot of words that kind of derive from light and sight in general. And like the Eastern witches have developed like their own language. Like I said, like they've developed their own like non-oral languages, and as such they have like sayings that kind of equate to this idea. I have a rough translation for you, actually. So there's: a blind sheep searches the sky for the eagle soaring beneath their hooves. So that is the philosophy of the Lucent witches, that it is strongly believed kind of like the focus on sight has done a huge disservice to the Lucent element. In this, the witches are some of like the most reverent of the Lucent elements around. Yeah, so that is the Lucent population that lives within Feymouth. We're still not done with Feymouth, okay? So next week we're going to talk about the Sylvan cultures that exist within Feymouth, and there's 2 major ones there, so we'll have a whole bunch to talk about. Thank you for listening. I'll see you guys in the next one. Please leave a comment, like, subscribe, you know. You've watched YouTube videos before, I think. Alright, goodbye.